At dawn, South Carolina's coast glows like an ancient altar. Golden light spills across winding marshlands, sketches long shadows over prehistoric dunes, and paints the pine forests and river deltas in soft amber. It is a landscape shaped by tides and time, but also, according to centuries of whispers, by civilizations long forgotten, cultures whose entire world revolved around the rising sun. Long before European colonists arrived, before even the well-known tribes of the southeast emerged, this land was home to peoples who left behind enigmatic monuments, celestial alignments, and ritual structures that defy the accepted historical timeline. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of ceremonial sites older than anyone expected, while local legends speak of sun calendars hidden in swamps, ancient mounds that glow during certain seasons, and ruins oriented perfectly to equinox dawns. These discoveries hint at a civilization driven not merely by survival, but by a profound, almost mystical obsession with the sun's path across the sky. The clues are buried in tidal islands, forgotten riverbanks, and forest clearings where stone arrangements catch the light in ways too deliberate to be natural. And in the stories carried quietly through generations of Gullah elders, Catawba descendants, and coastal families, the past becomes stranger still, tales of sunborn deities who shaped the land, rulers chosen by dawn omens, and cultures erased before recorded history began. Mainstream archaeology offers careful explanations, trade networks, mound builders, early agricultural societies, yet the patterns carved into the earth suggest something far older, something that walked the line between astronomy and religion, geometry and myth. As the first rays crest the horizon and wash across the Carolina lowcountry, the land seems to awaken an ancient memory. And so we begin our journey into a forgotten world, a world where the sunrise determined the fate of entire cultures, and where the sun still speaks, if you know where to look. According to mainstream archaeology, South Carolina's past follows a clean, orderly progression. First came the Paleo Indians, small bands of hunters crossing the southeast nearly 13,000 years ago. Then emerged the archaic cultures, adapting to warmer climates, building seasonal camps, and shaping the land with early trade routes. After them rose the woodland peoples, famous for pottery innovations, ritual mounds, and early village structures. Finally, the Mississippian sun chiefdoms dominated the region with large towns, platform mounds, and elaborate solar ceremonies. By the time Europeans arrived, these societies had given way to later tribes such as the Catawba, Chicora, Edisto, and Yamasee. This is the official story, and much of it is true. But beneath this neat sequence lies a deeper, stranger layer that archaeologists still struggle to explain. Across South Carolina's coastline and interior river valleys, researchers have found ceremonial sites older than the settlements they are supposedly linked to. Circular earthworks and linear alignments appear in contexts where no permanent villages existed, suggesting ritual activity before any known culture occupied the land. In some cases, the structures predate the Mississippian world by thousands of years, yet they show solar precision rivaling later sun chiefdoms. Even more troubling for the standard model are solar-aligned earthworks older than the entire Mississippian phenomenon. Some alignments point directly to solstice sunrise, others track equinox light, a few appear tuned to rare celestial cycles that would require long-term observation. These sites exist in swamp clearings, on barrier islands, and along forgotten stretches of the Pee and Santee rivers. Mainstream texts claim sophisticated sun rituals only flourished in the Mississippian period, yet the land reveals a much older tradition. Artifacts deepen the mystery. Pottery shards with non-local designs, stone tools resembling those from distant regions, and ornaments with stylistic ties to the Caribbean, Gulf Coast, and even Mesoamerica appear out of nowhere. They show contact, or influence, long before the accepted timelines allow. But instead of rewriting the timeline, official narratives quietly label these findings anomalous. Then there are the sudden shifts in religious practice, where societies appear to leap from simple woodland rites to complex solar cosmologies with no transitional artifacts, no gradual evolution. It is as if an older system resurfaced suddenly, or an older culture was already here, hidden beneath the archaeological layers. The textbook version of South Carolina's past is smooth and digestible. But the ground tells another story, one of forgotten sun religions, ancient alignments, and civilizations that predate the cultures we are taught to recognize. Beneath the recognized history lies a much older, sun-centered world, waiting for someone willing to see the parts that don't fit. Across South Carolina's marshlands, barrier islands, and pine-shadowed uplands lie remnants of ancient ritual landscapes, structures so old, so precise, and so powerfully tied to the movements of the sun that archaeologists still struggle to fit them into any known cultural timeline. These formations are not simple camps or burial sites. They are solar temples, engineered arrangements of earth, stone, and horizon lines, built by a people who understood the sky long before the Southeast's recognized tribes emerged. Among the oldest are the St. Helena archaic rings, mysterious circular earthworks that rise gently from the coastal plain. At first glance, they appear as mere berms, but careful analysis reveals something astonishing: their openings align directly with solstice sunrise and equinox sunset. Radiocarbon dating places them thousands of years older than the Mississippian sun cults, suggesting an archaic world society already mapping the heavens with deliberate precision. The rings were built from layered shell, clay, and sand, materials placed with intention, forming observatory platforms that mark celestial cycles few early cultures should have been tracking. Equally enigmatic are the Coosaw solar mounds, partially eroded structures hidden deep within tidal forest. These low mounds form a crescent-shaped enclosure that frames the summer solstice dawn perfectly between two distant tree lines. Archaeologists initially categorized them as habitation debris, until surveys revealed a repeating ratio in the layout, mirroring solar shrine patterns found in ancient Peru and the American Southwest. No village remains surround the site. No artifacts indicate permanent settlement. The mounds exist purely for ceremony, a temple with no congregation left to claim it. Farther inland lie the ruins of Little Alligator Mound, a collapsed earth and stone platform once believed to be a simple woodland construction. But new measurements tell another story: its long axis points straight toward the winter solstice sunrise, while a secondary alignment tracks the sun's zenith, a phenomenon rarely acknowledged in southeastern archaeology. Some researchers have compared its orientation to early Bahamian and Caribbean ritual sites, hinting at cultural exchanges or shared traditions far older than accepted timelines allow. The mound's builders engineered a sun-focused geometry that should not have existed here yet. Perhaps the most haunting of all is the Goose Creek Sun Circle, a nearly perfect ring of stones half buried in pine needles and marsh sediment. Though weathered by humidity and storms, its layout remains intact, concentric circles that frame dawn light on specific days of the year. At equinox sunrise, the first beam funnels through a narrow gateway stone and illuminates the center with uncanny precision. Local legend claims the site once served as a place where priests or chieftains listened to the sky speak. Radiocarbon tests from nearby soil layers placed the structure between 5,000 and 6,000 years old, long before the tribes now associated with the region existed. Across all these sites, the pattern is undeniable: stone-lined enclosures, concentric rings, bermed earth circles, platform alignments, solar gateways, all oriented to celestial events with mathematical accuracy. These are not random constructions. They are not seasonal camps. They are temples, observatories for a forgotten people who worshipped, measured, and lived by the sun. And yet, the cultures officially recognized in South Carolina's timeline do not claim them. The Catawba say the structures were already old when their ancestors arrived. Coastal tribes say the rings belong to people of the first dawn. Archaeologists admit they resemble ancient solar cults across the world, from Britain's circles to the Caribbean's petroglyph spheres to Mesoamerica's early observatories, but they appear millennia too early for such complexity in the southeast. Which leaves a single chilling possibility: South Carolina once hosted a vanished sun-centered civilization, a society so ancient that its temples now lie sunken in swamps, hidden under dunes, and forgotten in the quiet forests where dawn still touches their stones. The Mississippian world is often credited with bringing structured sun worship to the eastern United States. From Cahokia's towering Monk's Mound to Moundville's ceremonial plazas and Etowah's solar-aligned temple mounds, the Mississippians created an expansive religious network centered on the movements of the sun and stars. Their priests tracked solstices using wooden post circles, engineered plazas with cardinal precision, and built elevated platforms where rulers performed dawn rituals believed to renew cosmic balance. By 1000 to 1500 CE, the Mississippian sun cult dominated much of the southeast, a civilization steeped in astronomy, ritual timing, and sacred rulership. And yet, South Carolina refuses to fit neatly into this timeline. The state holds structures too old to belong to the Mississippians, artifacts that predate their rise by millennia. Solar-aligned rings along the coast date to the Archaic period, thousands of years before Mississippian priests carved their first effigy. Inland mounds reveal construction phases far earlier than the cultural layers typically associated with Mississippian architecture. In several sites, solstice markers were already in place long before the Mississippian world emerged. Then there are the construction styles, which break regional patterns entirely. While Mississippian temples favored large platform mounds, South Carolina's ancient sites include stone-lined solar gateways, concentric circular enclosures, bermed rings resembling early Caribbean or Bahamian ritual sites, low shell and earth platforms with astronomical precision unmatched elsewhere. These designs differ sharply from the rectangular, plaza-centered layouts found in neighboring Georgia and Alabama. Something older, something with a distinct architectural language, was already shaping the Carolina Lowcountry. Even more striking is the precision of these sun-aligned structures. In many South Carolina sites, solstice sunrise lines fall within a fraction of a degree of exact alignment, a level of accuracy exceeding most Mississippian observatories. Some circles mark zenith sun events, rare alignments requiring generations of observation. Others incorporate multi-phase sightlines suggesting a knowledge of solar cycles spanning centuries. The sophistication is undeniable, yet the builders remain anonymous. This leads many researchers to a radical possibility: the Mississippians did not originate South Carolina's sun traditions. They inherited them. Supporting this theory are clues scattered through the soil, ritual burn layers beneath Mississippian-era floors, buried offerings sealed long before the Mississippian expansion, and sun pits filled with charcoal, shells, and ochre arranged in radiating patterns. These pits resemble solar fertility rites found in ancient Caribbean cultures, hinting at a deeper lineage. Some burial sites contain bodies arranged in circular or radial patterns mimicking solar symbolism, long before Mississippian iconography appears. At multiple coastal and river sites, archaeologists discovered layered ceremonial sequences: earliest layers, simple shells, fire pits, small circular markers, later layers, carved stones and deliberate alignments, much later layers. Mississippian artifacts laid atop ritual spaces clearly older than their culture. It is as though generations of people returned to these sacred sites because the places themselves held power, not because their own culture invented the rituals. So who built the earliest solar temples? Some suggest an Archaic-era ritual society. Others hint at ancient coastal migrants connected to Caribbean sun cults. A few researchers quietly argue for a pre-Mississippian civilization, a forgotten people whose identity dissolved long before tribes like the Catawba or Chicora emerged. What we know is this: the Mississippians brought sun worship to much of North America. But in South Carolina, the sun was already speaking, through rings, mounds, gateways, and fire pits older than any recorded tribe. And if the Mississippians inherited this sacred landscape, then its original builders belonged to a past older, stranger, and far more mysterious than our histories dare to admit. When Spanish explorers first reached the Carolina coast in the early 1500s, they recorded encounters with a people unlike any they had ever seen. These were the Chicora, a coastal society described with awe, confusion, and, in some accounts, fear. Their ceremonies revolved entirely around the sun. Their chiefs bore titles tied to dawn and light. Their bodies were painted with enigmatic solar symbols that dazzled under early morning rays. And their rituals, performed on raised earthen platforms at first light, suggested a cosmology far older than the tribe their name eventually came to represent. Some chroniclers described the Chikora as wearing sun-shaped glyphs on their chests and foreheads, painted in ochre and charcoal, arranged in spirals and rays. Warriors carried shields etched with circular patterns that glowed when struck by the rising sun. According to Spanish reports, these symbols were not mere decoration, they represented a lineage traced back to the beings of the first dawn, a phrase the Chikora interpreters struggled to explain. Elders hinted these beings were the original bringers of fire, knowledge, and order. Rituals were performed on earthen platforms aligned precisely with sunrise angles. Witnesses described gatherings where priests lit fires at dawn, chanting to the horizon as if awaiting a signal. These were not simple dances or seasonal ceremonies, they were orchestrated events based on celestial timing, controlled by an elite class of sun priests as sophisticated as any known Mississippian cult. And then, almost as suddenly as they appear in historical record, the Chikora vanished. Within only a few decades of first contact, Spanish expeditions found their villages abandoned, their platforms empty, and their ceremonial grounds overtaken by forest. The Chikora identity dissolved so quickly that later maps show their territory swallowed by other tribes, as if their culture evaporated rather than fell in war. Archaeologically, they left almost nothing behind, no large towns, no burial fields, no distinctive pottery tradition. It is as though the Chikora existed for only a generation, then slipped into myth. This disappearance has baffled historians for centuries. Traditional explanations, disease, conflict, assimilation, fail to account for the total absence of Chikora material culture, especially for a people supposedly powerful and numerous. Some scholars privately suggest the Chikora were not a tribe in the conventional sense, but the last flicker of a much older sun-centric civilization that had been shrinking for centuries. When Spanish chroniclers met them, they may have witnessed the exhausted remnant of a priestly culture clinging to the rituals of an ancient world. This theory gains weight when comparing the Chikora to earlier, older solar-aligned sites across South Carolina. The St. Helena Archaic Rings, the Goose Creek Sun Circle, the Coosaw Solar Mounds, Little Alligator Mound. The Chikora rituals match these prehistoric structures with uncanny precision, suggesting continuity not over decades or centuries, but across millennia. In this interpretation, the Chikora were the final custodians of traditions inherited from a forgotten civilization, their knowledge maintained through oral rites and dawn ceremonies long after their temples faded. And when they disappeared, the last living bridge to South Carolina's ancient sun kingdoms vanished with them. Their fate remains one of the Southeast's greatest mysteries. A culture that glowed briefly under the rising sun, then vanished as if swallowed by the very light they worshipped. Across South Carolina's Piedmont and Midlands, ancient boulders rise from forests and riverbanks like forgotten altars, their surfaces carved with symbols that refuse to fit neatly into any known cultural tradition. These stones bear spirals, concentric sunbursts, solar serpents, star grids, and enigmatic geometric lines that seem to watch the sky as closely as their creators once did. Archaeologists classify them as mythic imagery or ritual art. But a closer look suggests something far more sophisticated, astronomical records etched in stone by a people obsessed with the sun. One of the most puzzling sites is 40-Acre Rock, where spirals carve their way across slanted rock faces in patterns that track the sun's seasonal path. Some spirals radiate outward like stylized solar flares, others wind inward as if marking cycles of eclipse or shadow. A few spirals align exactly with sunrise during the equinox, illuminating the carving center point for only a few seconds each year. This precision hints at intentional engineering, a solar calendar carved into stone long before European settlement. Along the Pacolet River, isolated glyphs reveal even stranger motifs. Here, concentric circles sit beside ladder-like grids, their spacing matching the angular movement of sunrise across the horizon over a 12-month span. Archaeologists describe them as mythic symbols, but independent researchers argue they resemble star tracking diagrams or seasonal counting systems. Local tradition whispers that these stones were once used by priests to read the sun serpent, an ancient spirit associated with light and renewal. Even more enigmatic are the carvings along the broad river, known as the sun serpent slabs. These massive boulders feature serpents whose bodies twist into flowing solar rays. Their heads face east, the direction of sunrise, while their tails coil into tight spirals, possibly encoding astronomical cycles. Some serpents contain interior lines forming grids, almost like logs tracking solar variation or eclipse sequences. When sunlight strikes the slabs at low angles in winter, the carving's shadows shift dramatically, highlighting different parts of the serpent motif in a sequence that mirrors the sun's seasonal arc. What makes these carvings truly astonishing is their resemblance to glyphs found in distant sun-cult regions such as Central American serpent sun motifs, Caribbean petroglyph spirals, southwestern vortex carvings tied to eclipse records. South Carolina's symbols were created thousands of miles away, yet they echo the same cosmic language, a language built on cycles, light, shadow, and celestial order. Archaeologists insist these carvings are religious or symbolic, offering safe explanations of myth-making. But the mathematical precision, the solar alignments, and the cross-cultural parallels suggest something richer. These stones may have been part of an ancient observational network, a system of ritual calendars and solar logs created by a civilization that tracked the sky with scientific devotion. The petroglyphs endure because stone remembers what the people did not. And when the sun rises over these carvings, illuminating lines that have waited centuries for light, it becomes clear, the stones were meant to speak, and they still speak today. South Carolina's sun-aligned rings, mounds, and petroglyphs are strange enough, but the artifacts tied to them are even harder to explain. Scattered across the lowcountry, midlands, and river valleys are objects that suggest a sophistication far beyond what mainstream archaeology assigns to the region's early cultures. Many of these artifacts surfaced briefly in surveys or private reports before being dismissed, shelved, or quietly disappearing into personal collections. But the descriptions remain, and together they paint the picture of a forbidden ancient sun cult with tools and symbols no one expected to find. Among the most striking are polished stone mirrors, thin slabs of quartzite and river-smoothed slate so perfectly shaped and buffed that they reflect sunlight in focused beams. These mirrors have turned up near ceremonial platforms and petroglyph sites, especially along the Santee and Pd rivers. Archaeologists call them ritual objects, but tribal elders insist they were used to catch the first light, hinting at dawn ceremonies involving solar reflection, a technology more commonly associated with Mesoamerican priesthoods than archaic Carolina cultures. Then there are the copper sun discs, small round plates hammered into perfect circles and engraved with radiating spokes. Their existence is troubling. They predate known metallurgy in the region by centuries, and no evidence of local smelting workshops has ever been found. Some discs were reportedly discovered in burial contexts older than the Mississippian era, suggesting a lost metallurgical tradition. Museums tend to classify these discs as trade items, but their isolated locations and early dates contradict any known trade networks. Equally perplexing are thin mica sheets carved into radiant patterns, found primarily in the Midlands. Mica is naturally reflective, catching dawn light with ethereal brilliance. Many sheets discovered in Carolina resemble the carved mica found in Hopewell mounds far to the north, but some bear unique designs, spirals, sunbursts, and geometric rays identical to Caribbean solar cult carvings. Such patterns imply cultural connections far broader, and far older, than the conventional timeline allows. The most controversial finds, though, are the figurines. A handful of small carved figures depict humanoid forms with headdresses, elongated features, or radiant crown-like motifs. Some resemble old-world solar deities, others echo Mesoamerican sun priests. None match traditional southeastern styles. These figurines rarely make it into official reports. One was found near St. Helena Island and quickly purchased by a private collector. Another surfaced during land clearing near Goose Creek, only to vanish after a brief mention in a local historical society newsletter. And then there is the pottery, shards decorated with sunburst patterns, coiling serpents, and radiant lines that mirror Caribbean and Bahamian solar iconography. A few archaeologists privately admit the stylistic link is unmistakable. But academically, acknowledging such parallels risks opening the door to alternative archaeology, a label many professionals fear as career-ending. It is no wonder, then, that so many of these items remain archived, misfiled, or quietly removed from public view. Official narratives prefer clean timelines and gradual cultural development, not mirrors, discs, figurines, and radiant symbols suggesting long-distance contact, forgotten technology, or a vanished priestly class devoted to the sun. Yet the artifacts persist in the margins of documentation and memory. Objects that should not exist here. Objects that imply a civilization hidden beneath the sand and marsh, one that looked to the rising sun long before history began recording names. As South Carolina's sun circles, petroglyphs, forbidden artifacts, and vanished peoples converge into a single, unsettling tapestry, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: something far older and far stranger once lived here. Something that built temples before tribes, carved calendars before pottery traditions, and tracked the heavens with an intensity that feels almost alien. Now we reach the climax, the theories that attempt to explain the impossible legacy buried beneath South Carolina's sand, swamp, and stone. 1. A pre-Mississippian solar religion spanning the southeast. The first theory suggests that long before the Mississippian sun chiefdoms rose to power, an even older civilization, or cultural network, practiced sophisticated solar worship across the southeast. Archaic rings, coastal sun circles, mica radiance, and early solar-aligned mounds hint at a system too organized to be isolated tribal activity. This theory argues, South Carolina's earliest solar temples predate Mississippian culture by thousands of years. The Mississippians adopted and expanded a tradition they did not originate. A forgotten priestly society may have maintained this cosmic knowledge long before recorded history. In this view, South Carolina was not an outlier, it was the cradle. 2. Seafaring migrants from the Caribbean or Mesoamerica. Some scholars quietly propose that ancient Caribbean or Mesoamerican navigators reached the Carolina coast centuries, even millennia, before Europeans. Ocean currents support the idea: West Indies to the Carolina Lowcountry is a direct drift route. The similarities in iconography are astonishing: sun serpent motifs, spiral calendars, mica and copper radiant symbols, platform temples aligned with equinox sunrise. If such voyagers arrived here, they may have fused their own solar doctrines with local beliefs, creating a hybrid culture that eventually dissolved, leaving only faint archaeological fingerprints. The Chicora, with their radiant body paint, dawn ceremonies, and first dawn lineage, may have been the last flicker of this maritime sun priesthood. 3. A coastal civilization wiped out by rising seas. Another theory ties South Carolina's mysteries to the end of the Ice Age, when sea levels rose more than 300 feet. Tens of thousands of square miles of coastal plain, including ancient settlements, temples, and observation platforms, sank beneath the Atlantic. This theory imagines a Bronze Age-like coastal society, builders who mastered stone circles and solar tracking, villages, shrines, and mounds now buried offshore. As the waters rose, survivors migrated inland, carrying fragments of their rituals. Over time, their knowledge eroded, until only circles, carvings, and myths remained. This would explain the sudden disappearance of early solar cultures, the break in ritual continuity offshore. Sonar hints of submerged structures along the Carolinas. If true, South Carolina's sun temples are the last surviving ruins of a drowned civilization. 4. Descendants of Ice Age survivors tracking the sun for survival. Some anthropologists believe that during the harsh environmental chaos at the end of the Ice Age, groups in the southeast began using the sun to track seasonal shifts, animal migrations, and climate patterns. Over generations, this evolved into a sun science, a survival tool that became a religion. This theory fits: early archaic solar rings, zenith tracking structures, ceremonial burn layers marking seasonal rituals. These people might have been descendants of Ice Age refugees, individuals who learned to read the sky because the land itself was too unpredictable. 5. A priestly caste preserving solar knowledge across millennia. A more esoteric theory argues that South Carolina's ancient sites were created not by a single civilization, but by a priestly caste that persisted through cultural shifts. These sun priests may have inherited knowledge from older coastal peoples migrated inland as sea levels rose, preserved solar rituals even as tribes changed, kept calendars and cosmology alive through secret tradition. This would explain why, the same solar logic appears across thousands of years. Chikora priests spoke of beings of the first dawn. Solar worship appears suddenly in multiple cultural layers in this interpretation. The temples were never abandoned, only their builders changed. For all their beauty, precision, and historical weight, South Carolina's ancient sun temples and artifacts remain strangely absent from mainstream scholarship. They appear in scattered papers, local surveys, and half-forgotten field notes, but rarely in major textbooks or academic conferences. Why? Because these sites threaten to upend everything we think we know about the Southeast's past. One major obstacle is geography. Many of the most important sites lie underwater, buried beneath marshes, drowned beneath tidal estuaries, or located along coasts that have shifted dramatically since the end of the Ice Age. Excavation is impossible without disrupting fragile ecosystems or navigating federal protection laws. Entire ceremonial landscapes may lie hidden beneath the Atlantic shelf, but they cannot be touched, mapped, or studied in depth. And where archaeologists can dig, they frequently collide with another barrier, protected indigenous land, where excavation is ethically and legally restricted. This creates vast blank spots in the archaeological record, places where the truth may lie just below the soil but cannot be disturbed. Then there are the artifacts that don't fit the accepted timeline: copper discs older than local metallurgy, mica carvings in radiant patterns, solar-calibrated stone rings predating the Mississippians. These objects force uncomfortable questions about technological development, migration, and cultural exchange. If acknowledged too openly, they would require historians to push Southeastern civilization back thousands of years earlier than current models allow. Rather than rewrite the timeline, many institutions choose silence. Complicating matters further is the implication that South Carolina's sun temples might show long-distance cultural connections. Their symbols, alignments, and artifacts resemble elements seen in the Caribbean, Central America, and even the Andes. Suggesting ancient contact across oceans or along coastal routes is considered academically risky, not because it's impossible, but because it conflicts with the long-standing belief that North American cultures developed mostly in isolation. Scholars fear that opening this door invites waves of fringe theories, making their work vulnerable to accusations of pseudo-archaeology. And so, in an attempt to protect academic credibility, whole categories of evidence remain off-limits. But the silence is cracking. LiDAR scans reveal structures under Carolina forests. Amateur archaeologists uncover solstice alignments too precise to be accidental. Sonar off the coast hints at submerged mounds and rings. Pottery with Caribbean-style sunbursts keeps emerging where no such influence should exist. An indigenous oral tradition, often dismissed in the past, speaks clearly of older peoples, first-dawn civilizations, and sun-born ancestors who shaped the land before recorded tribes existed. The tension grows each year, scientific caution on one side, mounting physical evidence on the other. Academic reluctance collides with a landscape that refuses to keep its secrets buried. Because if even a fraction of these discoveries are genuine, then the question becomes unavoidable: what if the real history of the Southeast predates the tribes by thousands of years? What if South Carolina's ceremonial rings, sun serpents, and radiant artifacts are not anomalies, but the last surviving pieces of a civilization we have yet to acknowledge? Each morning, when the first light spills across South Carolina's marshes and river-carved plains, it touches more than water and soil, it brushes the remnants of civilizations long forgotten. The forests that sway in coastal winds, the barrier islands shifting under tides, the pine-covered ridges of the Piedmont, all of them glow with secrets older than any recorded tribe, older than any colonial map, older even than the myths preserved in fading memory. This land has been a sanctuary of sun worship for thousands of years, and every sunrise seems to awaken echoes of those who once lived and died by its rhythm. Storms reveal buried rings of shell and stone. Droughts lower river levels to expose carved sun serpents not seen in generations. New scanning technologies uncover circles, platforms, and alignments hidden beneath centuries of forest growth. Archaeologists stumble upon mica radiance, polished mirrors, and copper fragments older than logic should allow. Piece by piece, the past forces itself to the surface, refusing to stay buried, refusing to be dismissed. South Carolina's ancient builders may have vanished, but their intentions remain etched in the land, temples aligned to solstice dawn, carvings timed to the sun's yearly arc, symbols that glow only when daylight strikes them at the perfect moment. These were not accidents. They were messages, from priesthoods, from astronomers, from cultures who believed the sun was more than a star. To them, it was memory, prophecy, and power. We stand in their shadow every time we walk the coast at sunrise or watch the evening light slip across an old mound. And for a moment, the distance between now and then disappears. The landscape remembers. The sky remembers. And the sun, constant, unchanging, eternal, remembers most of all. The question is no longer whether these lost sun cultures existed. It is how much more of their story still lies hidden. How many temples sleep beneath the swamps? How many carvings wait beneath the sand? How many secrets rise faintly each dawn, hoping someone finally notices? Because perhaps the sun priests never vanished at all. Perhaps their legacy still burns in the earth, waiting for the right moment to shine again.